All right, ladies and gentlemen, due to the holiday week, we're already 4 games into week 13 of the 2024 fantasy football season, but the remainder of week 13 is kicking off in just a few hours. So before you set your final lineups, here are 8 things you need to know before week 13 of the fantasy season. All right, let's get this one out of the way. Let's start with the fact that Brock Purdy is going into Sunday night football with a questionable tag. His status for the week is still up in the air, but according to Kyle Shanahan, he is expected to play against the Bills on Sunday Night Football. But we can't really trust anything Kyle Shanahan says when it comes to player injuries, right? But I've said it all week long. I believe there's going to be a push for Brock Purdy to play, as this is obviously a big game, as at this point in the season for the Niners, every game is a big game as they try and make a playoff push in a division that's still pretty wide open. And I think with what we got out of Brandon Allen in week 12, if he starts in week 13, this game is basically chalked up to a loss in the snow against that Bills tough defense, right? But regardless here, even if Brock Purdy is going to play, which once again, the trend is that he's going to play, this is a tough matchup. It's going to be a snowy game. And overall, I just don't feel so good about Brock Purdy because it is a injury to his throwing shoulder. So what does that mean here in terms of fantasy? Well, I'm probably avoiding Brock Purdy, especially in single quarterback formats and super flex double quarterback formats. I would look at other options as well. But what about everybody else? What about Deebo Samuel, Jawan Jennings, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey? We got plenty of viable fantasy options on this team. I'm probably avoiding everybody except for George Kittle and maybe Christian McCaffrey, okay? It's still a good matchup for C-Mac. The Bills have allowed the 30th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. The snow could mean more touches for both Christian McCaffrey and James Cook on the other end of things. So I think I'm okay with Christian McCaffrey, but we also have to look at the fact that he played with a much lower ceiling last week with no Brock Purdy. I know Purdy, like we're saying, theoretically is going to play. And even in his first 2 games back, he's played at a little bit of a lower ceiling in terms of Christian McCaffrey standards. But I think C-Mac's okay in this matchup due to the matchup and due to the fact that the game script could help him. I think George Kittle, you just can't bench. I just don't know how you bench George Kittle with what he's done on the season with Brock Bowers right now as the only tight end with more fantasy points. But I'm very worried due to the matchup here about Jawan Jennings and Deebo Samuel, and due to the quarterback situation with Brock Purdy being injured, and due to the weather. So I'm avoiding Jennings. I'm avoiding Deebo Samuel. Kittle is good to go in my mind because of what he's done on the season. Christian McCaffrey, okay. Depends on who you have. Purdy, I'm completely out on this week. And we will find out. Maybe by the time this video releases, maybe later in the day, if Brock Purdy is even playing in week 13. The next thing that you need to know is that Josh Downs is ruled out this week, also dealing with a shoulder injury. He is not going to be playing against the New England Patriots, and I think that's going to potentially lead to a big game for Michael Pittman, a player that we haven't really talked about a ton throughout the week on the channel, but this is a strong matchup as the Patriots are allowing the 25th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. And I know it's been a really bumpy road this season if you've owned Michael Pittman, but he looked really good in week 12 in another good matchup against the Detroit Lions. 7 targets, 6 catches, 96 receiving yards, 15.6 fantasy points. And overall, whether it's Joe Flacco or Anthony Richardson at quarterback, Pittman's going to be playing as a wide receiver 1 this week, so you have all the reason to have tons of faith in Pittman going into this matchup. He's kind of one of these players. He's probably hanging around your bench, might be a flex, might be a wide receiver 2. I know we don't have any bye weeks this week, but I would really consider your overall options at wide receiver this week. And if you own Michael Pittman, I think he's kind of in must-start territory. Very good floor for Pittman this week, and I think the upside is also there due to matchups. So no Josh Downs this week. Maybe we see some more volume to Alec Pierce or A.D. Mitchell. We'll find out, but ultimately, I think that this is going to be a big week for Michael Pittman, and really, he's got to be the clear-cut #1 wide receiver on this team going into the week. So if you own Pittman, I say fire him up. I think he's going to be a very strong start here in week 13. One thing I'm doing is I'm hitting straight to Underdog to take the over on Michael Pittman's total receiving yards, currently sitting at 51.5 receiving yards. He smashed that last week with 96 total receiving yards, and I just love this matchup. He's the pure wide receiver one for the Colts this week, so I'm heading straight to Underdog to take the over on Pittman's total receiving yards. Don't forget, all new users who sign up with promo code THECATCH are getting a free NFL Pick'em from Underdog to use towards Week 13. Take your free Pick'em, pair it with Pittman's total receiving yards. Once both of those lines hit, you're going to automatically triple your cash entry. And on top of that, as long as you sign up with promo code THECATCH, you're also going to receive a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. So it's a free NFL Pick'em and up to $1,000 in bonus cash on Underdog when you sign up with promo code THECATCH. That link is down below. Next thing that you need to know is that J.K. Dobbins is headed to IR as he's dealing with a knee injury that he suffered against his former team, the Baltimore Ravens, in Week 12. So what is that going to mean for the Chargers backfield? Well, it looks like Gus Bus is going to get the start here in terms of the running back with the best volume. It's probably Gus Edwards going into a tough matchup against the Falcons on the road here, who have allowed the 12th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs. Do I think Gus Edwards is worth a spot play? Sure, a desperation spot play. But once again, there's no bye weeks this week, so I don't really see why you would need to play Gus Edwards. He's a pure desperation start because we got two other running backs on this team who are going to see some sort of volume, and that's rookie Kamani Vidal, and then Hassan Haskins, who, don't forget, played in Michigan with Harbaugh as well, gets some goal line touches, has had some goal line touches throughout the year, and I've gotten a lot of questions about Kamani Vidal. He's got one big catch against Denver that led to a touchdown. In terms of anything else on the season, he's done nothing with his opportunities. So got a lot of questions like, is he worth a stash? Should we start him? You could stash him, sure, but I think that Gus Edwards is the safest bet here. But then once again, what is the real upside with Gus Edwards? We look over the next couple weeks, right? They get Atlanta this week, not a great matchup, right? Then the following week, not a great matchup against Kansas City. Good matchup against Tampa Bay. Not a great matchup in Week 16 against Denver. And then Dobbins, in theory, will be back in Week 17. Maybe they rest him. Depends, I would say, on what the Chargers' overall record is at that point, as they're definitely in the playoff race and everything. But, you know, I just don't see a ton of upside for Edwards moving forward. It's going to depend really on what type of touchdown upside he brings to the table, being the lead back here. He did score in Week 12 against Baltimore at the very end of the game for what it's worth, but this is a situation that I'm looking to avoid in Week 13. And I don't know that I really love it in Week 14, but maybe out of desperation, you could take a look here as we're going to have 6 teams on bye week in Week 14. The other note here is that the Chargers have been throwing the football more as of late and have been throwing with more efficiency. So I think they're going to be looking to throw first and foremost, especially against a Falcons unit that's very poor against the pass. So this week, I'm avoiding the situation. I'm not as high on Vidal as some others might be. And I really think we just want to kind of sit back, see what happens here, and only look to start a Chargers running back if we are truly 100% desperate. All right, next thing that you need to know is that I still think Chase Brown is a must-start running back here in Week 13 and really for the rest of the fantasy season. I was really surprised to see how many questions I got about Chase Brown throughout the week. Like, I know it's a tough matchup, Pittsburgh allowing the 13th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs, but Chase Brown is the running back in Cincinnati. He has 100% of the snaps. That many. Literally. Since we've seen Zach Moss go to IR. It's not going to be Khalil Herbert. It's not going to be Travion Williams. Chris Evans, Zach Moss on IR. It's all Chase Brown here this week and the rest of the season. I mean, maybe as the season progresses, as we start to wrap up, they try and get Herbert more involved, spell Chase Brown a little bit. But the Bengals are on the outside looking in terms of the playoff hunt, to say the least, right? They have to win like every single game. I mean, they're not eliminated yet. I don't know exactly how it looks, but They haven't won that many games this season. It feels like they need to win every single game to have a shot to get in the playoffs. And they're going to be putting out their best offensive players on each and every snap. And that has been Chase Brown really since Zach Moss has headed to IR. But even before then, Chase Brown was very productive as well. We look since week 4 of the season, Chase Brown has 14 or more fantasy points in every game except for 2. Double-digit fantasy points in every game except for 1. And in his last 3 starts, 19 or more fantasy points. And look at the overall volume. 27 touches, 5 catches. 13 touches, 9 catches. 22 touches, 5 catches. He's been extremely involved in this offense. He is a must-start player in fantasy no matter what. And I think what's happened with a lot of rosters out there is you got Chase Brown off the waivers, you drafted him super late, you got other studs in front of him, other like well-known names in front of him, stuff like that. But if you are in a spot that you can flex Chase Brown, do it. Not just this week, but each and every week. Chase Brown is a must-start player. Do not overthink it. He is in our starting lineups going into week 13. And for the love of God, please don't bench Bucky Irving either. I was really surprised about how many questions I got that involved Bucky Irving throughout the week as well. And I think it's a very similar situation to Chase Brown. You picked up Bucky Irving off of the waivers. You drafted him super late and held on to him. Whatever it may be, you're in a spot where you got other guys like Kyron Williams, Jonathan Taylor in front of him. Not exactly sure what to do here. You need to start Bucky Irving this week, okay? And probably for the remainder of the season as well, as he's a very strong strength of schedule for the most part. One of the best playoff schedules as well. Bucky Irving gets the Panthers. They're allowing the most fantasy points to opposing running backs. You have to start Bucky Irving. And I love all the Buccaneers starters this week. I still really like Rachaad White this week. Maybe Sean Tucker does something. The fumble at the goal line last week was not very encouraging. I love Cade Otton. It's a great matchup for him. I think it's going to be a good Mike Evans week. I think Baker Mayfield's a must-start quarterback. But the true must-start player on this roster this week, and for your fantasy rosters, has to be Bucky Irving. So productive so far on the season. Single digits 4 times on the year, but we've gotten plenty of touches to Rachaad White. All that stuff. We look since week 6. He has 16 or 15.4 or more fantasy points in every game, except for week 9 in a tough matchup against Kansas City. You own Bucky Irving. You got to keep rolling with him. What we saw in week 12 against the Giants, 27.2 fantasy points, 88 yards off of 12 touches. The rushing touchdown, 6 targets, 6 catches, 64 receiving yards. That is the type of stat line that we're potentially looking at once again against Carolina this week. And Carolina, I mean, they're playing much better overall offensive football, and they're probably going to keep this game competitive as Tampa Bay's secondary is very weak, and their run defense has been very weak as of late as well. So I think this is going to be a nice game script, and we're going to see plenty of volume to Bucky Irving, and he's going to have another monster stat line. Do not bench Bucky Irving, whatever you do this week. He is an absolute must-start running back. Have a really tough time also not heading straight to Underdog to take the over on Bucky Irving to score a rushing or receiving touchdown this week. This feels like a free pick. He has a touchdown in each of his last 2 games, and this is the best matchup he's gotten all season long. So I'm heading straight to Underdog to take Bucky Irving to score a touchdown. You could also take his total rushing yards, currently only sitting at 59.5 as well. Really like both of these lines. Don't forget, when you sign up with promo code TheCatch, that link is down below, you're getting a free NFL Pick'em on Underdog. Take your free Pick'em. Take Bucky Irving to score a touchdown. Once both of those lines hit, you're going to automatically triple your cash entry. And as long as you guys sign up with the link down below and promo code TheCatch, you're also going to receive a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. All right, the next thing that you need to know is that Marquez Valdes-Scantling is still out there on the waiver wire in a lot of leagues. He's currently sitting at 41% rostered. I know we have no teams on bye week here in week 13, but if you are in need of a last-minute flex, a last-minute start at wide receiver, I think this is your best shot you're going to get on the waiver wire. It's a strong matchup as the Rams have allowed the 21st most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. I know the volume has been low for MVS in those last 2 starts, But the production's been there. 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games, 16.7 or more fantasy points in his last 2 games. So if you need a play at flex, you need somebody to grab last minute, I think this is your best overall shot. He is the true wide receiver 1 on the Saints. There's nobody else on this roster at wide receiver. I've been talking about it all week, talked about it going into week 11. There's just nobody else here, okay? Kevin Austin, as of 43 minutes ago, at the time I'm recording this video, was elevated from the practice squad. So he's around now, okay? Mason Tipton was a healthy scratch in the last game. Cedric Wilson was also a healthy scratch in that game. And 40 minutes ago, at the time I'm recording this, Dante Pettis was elevated. So those are your wide receivers for the Saints going into the week. Dante Pettis, Kevin Austin, and MVS. MVS, the only one here with any true chemistry with Derek Carr. He is going to continue to get what he's been getting. I know it's still low volume, but he's getting the opportunities. They're drawing up plays for him. He's the only wide receiver worth any value on this team, and I always say it, wide receiver 1s on their respective teams, regardless of what the offense is, regardless of what the team is, hold fantasy value, just like an RB1, right? So if MVS is out there, listen, it's going to be Taysom Hill. It's going to be Alvin Kamara. But then this is the next guy up, okay? And he's the only wide receiver we can start from a fantasy perspective when it comes to the Saints. So if you need a play at wide receiver, he sits at 41% rostered. He could end up being a viable flex option here in week 13. All right, the next thing that you need to know is that Devonta Smith is still listed as questionable at the time of recording this going into that afternoon game on the road against the Baltimore Ravens. So what do we do here? If you own Devonta Smith, I think this is, you want to start Devonta Smith this week. It's a great matchup. The Ravens are allowing the 31st most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. And for the past couple of weeks, they've been dead last, allowing the 32nd most. The Vikings just overtook that spot. So they've been very bad against opposing wide receivers on the season. I think this is a strong bounce back spot for Devonta Smith. And he gets another good matchup in week 14 against Carolina Panthers. So if you've been worried because you're a Devonta Smith owner, and he's had the 2 bad games in weeks 10 and 11, he had that kind of goose egg 0.8 points in week 7. Just don't freak out. First and foremost, in every other game on the season, Devonta Smith has had 14.9 or more fantasy points in every other game. He's been fantastic on the season. I know some people have been down on him because this stretch has been aggravating, but he's been playing hurt. If he's good to go in week 13, I have a very tough time benching Devonta Smith. Depends on who else you have here, but pay attention to his status. He does unfortunately play in the later window, so that's going to affect things. But if he plays, I still think he's a strong start this week. He's averaged 13 fantasy points per game on the season. I really want to try and start Devonta Smith this week. But unfortunately, until we get a better update, maybe we have that by the time this video comes out, we just don't know what we're going to do with Devonta Smith. But pay close attention. If you are a Devonta Smith owner, I think he's going to end up being a strong start this week due to the matchup, due to the game script, right? I mean, this is one of those games you kind of wish was a primetime game. But nonetheless, I mean, this is going to be probably the best game of the entire weekend. We got 2 of the best overall teams, 2 of the best running backs, 2 of the best quarterbacks. On top of that, we have 2 very good run defenses in the Eagles and the Ravens. A better pass defense for the Eagles, but you would still expect that both teams are going to be forced to throw the football in this matchup. So we'll see what happens here. But all I'm saying is if you own Devonta Smith, depending on your other options, you probably want to wait around and see if he's going to play, because if he plays, he should be a strong start here in week 13. All right, last but not least, got to talk about at least one tight end in the video, and let's go with Cade Otton. Mentioned it earlier in the video, but I am all in on the Buccaneers offense this week, and I'm all in on Cade Otton this week as well. Talked about it earlier in the week in the must-start video. Like, Cade Otton should still be in that category of like a Jonnu Smith, where like this is a guy that we picked up later in the season, but at this point, like, we're just starting him, and he's also one of these players that I think is still flex worthy. Like, if you have a tight end like a McBride or a Kittle or somebody that you just outright trust each and every week, Cade Otton is still an option in the flex, but the last 2 weeks have been much lower ceilings for Cade Otton, and that's the main reason I want to talk about him. He's moved back to the tight end 9 on the season, which is still very good, but 4 points in week 12, bye week in week 11, 8.5 in week 10. So I think a lot of that kind of hype we had with Cade Otton in the weeks with no Mike Evans, no Chris Godwin, all that stuff going on has kind of died down. But Cade Otton also had some really good matchups in that stretch: Baltimore, Atlanta, and Kansas City before 2 tougher matchups against San Francisco and the Giants, who going into week 12, the Giants were allowing the fewest fantasy points to tight ends. The Lions have now overtaken that spot, but still the Giants have been really good against opposing tight ends on the season. But this week he gets the Carolina Panthers, who are allowing the most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. They have been awful against tight ends on the season, just like they've been awful against running backs, right? But this is a smash spot for Cade Otton. And the other thing was he was not necessary in week 12. I mean, the run game just completely overtook things. The game script did not help him whatsoever. I mean, Mike Evans barely got any volume, right? Like, they just did not need to throw the football against the Giants. But I do think that the Panthers are going to push back in this game, and they match up well against that Tampa Bay Buccaneers secondary, like we talked about earlier in the video. So this should be a competitive game script, and I think that will benefit Cade Otton on top of the matchup. So if you own Cade Otton, you're still hanging on to him, which you should be, this is a great bounce back spot. Then he gets another great matchup in week 14 against the Raiders. And don't forget, he plays the Panthers again in the fantasy championship. So if you own Cade Otton, strong start at tight end. If you need to throw him into the flex because you feel like you got nothing better, he is a flex-worthy tight end here in week 13 as well. And that'll do it for today's video. There are 8 things that you need to know heading into week 13 of the fantasy season. As always, guys, drop me a comment if you guys need anything heading into week 13. I will try and get every single comment on this video answered before kickoff starts. If you guys have any fantasy questions, drop them down below. And of course, if you guys are new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button on the way out, because we're going to have every single thing you could possibly need on a weekly basis to help you guys dominate each and every week of 2024 fantasy football. So make sure you are subscribed so that you don't miss out on any of the content. And with that, I'll say good luck in week 13. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.